Well, good morning again. I'm so happy to be introducing our guest preacher on this morning. He is no stranger to Brite, as he has been involved in the life of Brite for a number of years. Our preacher this morning is the Reverend Charles Johnson. Reverend Charles Johnson is a pastor and public education advocate. He is founder and pastor of Bread, a faith community here in Fort Worth, Texas. Throughout his 40-year pastoral ministry, he has served churches in Mississippi, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Texas. Reverend Johnson served on the faculty of McAfee School of Theology at Mercer University as visiting professor of preaching. He has also served as a pastoral mentor for students at Perkins School of Theology and here at Brite Divinity School, where he also serves as one of our Board of Trustee members. He is involved in civic and denominational life and has been twice named Baptist of the Year by the Baptist Center for Ethics in 2004 and 2018. He was inducted into the Morehouse College's Martin Luther King Jr. Board of Preachers in 2008, and he was named National Outstanding Friend of Public Education by the Horace Mann League in 2020. He is married to Jana, has 3 children, and 3 grandchildren. He enjoys reading, backpacking, and spending time at his ranch here in Texas. Well, without further ado, I am so happy to invite and welcome the Reverend Charles Johnson to Brite Chapel Worship Experience. Reverend Johnson?
Thank you, Reverend Aretha. It's a delight to be here. Somebody say amen if you can hear me. I want to make sure I'm not talking to the thin ether out there. I'm delighted. Thank you, Reverend Aretha. I'm delighted to be with all of you. It's always a pleasure to be in Brite Chapel, and I look forward to the day with you when we're gathering and congregating again in person. It's a privilege for me to share with you today. I have some thoughts that have been chewing on me for a while now that I want to share with you about the state of public Christian witness in America. And Lord knows we need a witness for Christ today more than ever. We're sick as a nation, and I hope to share with you, opening to your feedback and dialogue about a path that might bring us out of this sickness and malaise. I'm thinking about Cornel West's famous phrase today. Reverend Aretha and I had some exchange about it, that justice is love in the public square. And instead of focusing on the justice part, which is, it seems to me, what we do in addressing the powers and principalities, that might be City Hall or Congress or the White House or the courts or the state legislature. I sort of want to get a little more local than that. And I want to emphasize the love part, the love for the public square. For God so loved the world, as Reverend Katie reminded us in her beautiful prayer. This dimension of love. Do I love the public square, my neighborhood, my community? And how do I put that love into action? In observing the Greek armies of his day, Aristotle was haunted by one question in particular. What was it that possessed those young 16 and 17 and 18-year-old soldiers to march headlong into their death? Where did such valor and courage and obedience come from? How was it that those young adults would do such an outrageous thing at the outset of their lives, giving themselves with such sacrifice? And after a lot of study and a lot of observation, Aristotle determined that what produces this ethic of selfless courage in young people whose emotional maturity was only at an incipient stage was a military that served as a community of moral formation. a community of moral formation. Aristotle concluded that humans cannot think or feel their way into ethical behavior, but can only act, can only do, as Micah says, walk, as Micah says, into humility, sacrifice, obedience, kindness, honesty, integrity. It is only in the practiced repetition of such behaviors that these soldiers instinctively performed heroically. It's this culture of repeated and disciplined action within a context of affirming community that produces moral people. I don't mean for this to be too simplistic or facile, but I'm just thinking out loud with you, my collegial fellow ministers of God. But it seems to me that we need to explore the public square as a place and a program of disciplined action to do as Micah says, to walk, embodying justice as our theme indicates. There are certain distinctions at work in our respective places of service, whether they be churches or nonprofits or schools or even our protest movements. I want these groups to be laboratories of moral formation. The emphasis of such a training ground is communal rather than individual. I want us, at least for right now in this reflection, to focus on the communal dimension of these laboratories of moral shaping and formation. Self-identity is drawn from the good of the whole group. This is why the localized nature of the public institution, I'm giving my ministry and life these days, a lot of it, not only to our small congregational life at Brite Fellowship, but to public education policy and producing policy that serves our children in a way that is just. And so I'm thinking about the localized nature of our institutions, the local church, the local nonprofit agency, the local hospital, the local academy, like our seminary at Brite, the shared space of neighborhood. The program of instruction is embodied rather than abstracted. Learning is not only intellectual, but it is also physical and interactive. And Katie, I love what you just did with us in this embodied prayer. It's not something that we experience in our mind or even in our emotion. No, we were touching. We had a physicality to that devotion to God. Learning happens with the hands as well as the head. Truth and knowledge are not strictly conceptual, but also concrete. Practice over theory. Now, faith communities have been predicated and constructed on this premise. We submit ourselves to a community of like order. We join a regimen of repeated action that results in social uplift, the incarnation of that which is conceptual. In our mosques, in our synagogues, in our churches, we are doers. We don't just do any old thing we want to. No, we take bread, we break it. We take a cup, we bless it. We read a book, not just any book, but a book of texts to which we submit ourselves. In other words, we put into practice an established and repeated system of rituals. It's what religion is. I don't want to belabor this point, y'all, but it's what a disciple does. A disciple does two things. Says what her leader says and does what her leader does. Those are the two things that make a disciple. To make a particular metaphorical reference, the disciple drops his nets, quits doing that which he or she was doing, and follows his or her leader. Quit doing that which was shaping you before and start following your leader and doing what your leader does and saying what your leader says. I've got a couple of examples that come to my mind. This is what every single soldier does in basic military training. Now, that might be an unusual metaphor for a preacher who follows a nonviolent gospel to employ, but bear with me. The program that those young women and young men were following, it ended the day they signed up for military service. The prevailing myth of the young man or woman that they are autonomous over their own life, that gets flushed down the toilet. That's stripped away, and that life is stripped down through a strict program of repeated actions. In a short time, late adolescent boys and girls become men and women. Not one time in basic training does a commanding officer ask them how they feel or what they think or what their opinion is. The emphasis is on practice. Those 16 weeks comprise a definite, defined community of engagement, a regimen of moral formation. Another example comes to mind, gang activity. However violent, a gang is a community of moral formation. Isn't this the place where these young people are mentored, shaped into a pattern of behavior and action? I'm thinking right now, as you think about very frequently as we explore a way out of our national sickness, about the civil rights movement. And that wonderful movement of transformation which came out of the churches probably was the last social justice movement producing categorical, sweeping, positive change in America. We've had some less extensive and exhaustive social justice movements since then, but it was fueled by local African American churches who taught their members nonviolent resistance to systemic oppression. Sunday school classes, congregations, small little churches in neighborhoods and small towns all over the South. People were taught to practice certain actions and behaviors that would enable them to do the unnatural moral thing, not return evil for evil. And so when the dogs were released on them in Selma and the public humiliation foisted on them in Greensboro and the hoses turned on them in Birmingham, they exemplified transcendent moral character and embodied an astonishing moral witness because they had practiced it over and over and over, how they would react in such situations, just like a soldier, just like a disciple. I hope I'm not being too idealistic in thinking that we can import some of this into our classrooms, into our congregations, into our own contexts. Several concrete things come to my mind. First, we must recover local civic virtue as a provision of the common good. Locally owned, locally provided, locally operated. And in order to recover this local control, if you will, we're going to have to turn off the media, because the media is owned and operated by a small group of consolidated, very rich, powerful people a long way away from where we live. The leader best equipped to serve folks and shape folks is the one closest to them. Really, I'm speaking to you. The notion that national corporations know how to teach our fellow citizens better than you do is sheer nuts. The consolidation and nationalization and privatization of authority essentially is a money-driven disease of disruption. It's what's gotten us into this mess that we're in right now. And everybody in this worship celebration knows how to get us out of this mess. We go, we do, and we walk. Second, get rid of the abstracted concepts of authority disassociated from the embodied communal and local life of our neighbors. This disassociation is Gnosticism, and it's wreaked havoc on our kids, demoralized our leaders, stripped our professions of their moral dimensions. It is wrong, and it must stop now. Third, refund, restore, and involve yourself in community programs. Community programs. Athletic involvement, aesthetic expression, symphony, art club, vocational exploration, military enlistment. These are the activities that have been eliminated by disembodied and Gnostic hyper-individualism. Now we have this ridiculous notion that we just do whatever we feel like doing, whatever we think we want to do. No, go sign up with a group and do what they do and say what they say. Establish cohorts of character formation, brothers and sisters. Sports, football, basketball, baseball, golf, swimming, volleyball, soccer. Debate, speech, drama, theater, dance, art, music, band, where our ranch is in Eastland County. I love driving into De Leon, Texas, a little town of about 1,500 people. And there's a sign that says the Shakespeare Club meets on the third Wednesday of every month. That's what we need. I imagine that cohort of character formation has long been defunct. But somewhere along the way, some people got together in De Leon, Texas, of all places, and read Shakespeare. And I'm saying in a very concrete, absurdly specific and local suggestion that we need to do that all over again. Your congregation, your nonprofit, your place of service, your classroom is a community of moral formation. The list goes on. Book clubs, Girl Scouts, Rotary, Alcoholics Anonymous. Not only in schools, but also in our adult lives. Let us join with community and business partners to establish guilds of training, culinary arts, automobile mechanics, computer technology, carpentry, computer technology. We all need that. Do I hear an amen? Carpentry, plumbing, electrical contracting, masonry. These are programs that enable us to discover our natural abilities and talents. They teach us obedience to the authority of a coach. They instill values of discipline, order, compassion, respect, solidarity, teamwork, leadership, grit, creativity. They construct the mentor-mentee relationship so essential to the character of human and the texture of human interaction. They enable us to become a part of something bigger than we are as individuals. In these laboratories of moral formation, truth is caught more than it is taught. This method of what Soren Kierkegaard called indirect communication conveys the profoundest and loftiest notions that govern human behavior. When President Williams invited me years ago to serve on the Brite Divinity School Board of Trustees, my goodness, that came out of the clear blue for me. What business do I have being a trustee of a prestigious national divinity school? But President Williams was gracious and insistent, and in a moment of weakness, I said yes. And even though I leapt off into the unknown, well, guess what? That trustee board, a community of moral formation, has taught me what to do and what to say. And I've practiced and practiced to the point where, and we meet this Thursday and Friday, hold us in your prayers, to the point that it has become an important community shaping my life and spirituality. Not perfect, no more perfect than your own congregation or your own context. But something doesn't have to be perfect in order to be good. Of course, I'm a pastor. I believe the local congregation to be the community resource center for these partnerships. And this is our message in Pastors for Children. We're now expanded to 8 states. I invite you to be a partner with us as we try to promote the public school as this community of moral formation. Y'all, we need a massive recommitment to universal, experiential, and embodied education. And I'm not talking about just K-12 or our undergraduate programs or the graduate program that you're involved in so significantly right now. I'm talking about our entire adult lives, communities of learning with profound moral dimensions, provided and protected by a secure public trust. I'm talking about doing and walking as love in action for the public square. And we practice and we practice and we practice those virtues. And suddenly we wake up and we have a more perfect union. God knows we can do better than we're doing right now. So let's rededicate ourselves to being disciples, to doing what our leader told us to do, saying what our leader told us to say. I love this story from the life of Renoir, the famous painter. I think about it all the time. Of course, no greater master of French Impressionism than Renoir. But when he was old, he was stricken with crippling arthritis and his hands became gnarled fists, just knots. But he was a disciple. He was obedient to a craft. And he would have his assistants lash the paintbrushes on his gnarled hands. He could not any longer, with any digital dexterity, manipulate the paintbrush as he had done so flawlessly and masterfully his entire life. And he had them tie the paintbrushes so that he could do what God had placed him on the planet to do. And the last entry that he dictated in his journal shortly before his death was a reference to his beloved flower, the anemone. He painted hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of canvases of anemones. And his last journal entry was, I finally learned how to paint anemones. Let's practice, y'all. How do we become fully human? We practice. How do we get out of the sickness we're in as a nation? We practice. How do we become disciples of Christ? We practice. Love in action. And what better place to do that than the community public square? In the name of the Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer, and all the people of God said, amen.